for joining us for the IJO Livewire. I would urge all of you to move forward. If you feel that's comfortable, you could move your seats forward. I think we are a closed group here because publishing research and writing about writing research is only close to the heart for very few, even though there are many who are in the business of teaching ophthalmology and training students, I guess. But I think we can all still be torchbearers in this venue and this portal of research writing in ophthalmology. And we have drafted our session into two parts. Session one on all you want to know about publication ethics. The focus has been on publication ethics this time, and the first one session we'll probably move it down to the second half of our timing, and session two we'll move forward. Dr. Rohit Saxena, Professor Dr. Rohit Saxena, head squint and neuro-ophthalmology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Rajendra Prasad of Ophthalmic Sciences here, and I welcome you, Dr. Rohit, to the podium, and do join us. And he is also holding the coveted position of Secretary of the Institute's Ethics Committee, and that's a very, very big responsibility, and we are all scared of him because all our research proposal goes through a very tight scrutiny through his eyes, which does not miss anything at all. And I think we continue to learn a lot more from him on the setbacks we have in our research writing. However experienced we are, I think every time I write a protocol, I do find there's something lacking, and I always wish there's somebody who will guide me more to make it more perfect, so that I don't have to give more work for Rohit to do. Yeah, so Rohit has been a wonderful colleague, always a wonderful friend as well, and I'm very happy to have you with us, Rohit, today. And he's going to educate all of us on the FAQs on permissions required in research and research writing. I think this is not only important for writing research, but this is important before you start our research. So that's why I had a huge big panel of people who are all into research writing and planning research, because this needs to be done at a planning stage. So Rohit, it's all yours. Please educate us more on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Anati. Thank you for those very kind words. Can I have the slide? Permissions required in research. Actually, trying to understand or run through a very gamut of permissions that may be required can be daunting. As Dr. Vanati mentioned, I learned a lot of these when I actually became part of the ethics committee at AIIMS, and realized there are a lot of rules and regulations that are related to research. So first, of course, whenever you are looking for permissions, in fact, whenever you are doing research, the key questions that you need to ask for and accordingly design your protocol, design your applications, design your form would be: what is the purpose of your research? What is the population under study which you are going to work on, and the place where you're going to do this research. So these key questions are going to, or answers to these key questions are going to actually govern the permissions required, your protocol, and all those related things. So these are just nowhere near exhaustive list of permissions that are required for research. There are a lot more, and they may be specific to the kind of research you are doing. But more or less, most of the research that we do or I have been involved in, these are the permissions that I have had to take or we would have to require to take. So the first one is the Drug Controller General of India, and the DCGI is the omnibusman for any drugs and devices that are going to be researched or marketed by any entity in the country. So that would include individuals, that would include pharma companies, that would include any startup that is designing a new device that would have whether diagnostic, interventional, or any therapeutic purpose. So the first and the most important group is the DCGI, the CDSCO. It's the CDSCO is the name of that the building and the place and the website, which is the licensing authority. Wherever you are going to do your research, like I mentioned, site or a place is important. So site permissions are important from depends upon your institution, your school. So if you're doing it in a school or a academic institution, like a lot of us are involved in school screening, besides the permission from the principal, you may have to go to the Directorate of Education or the DM of that place, because these are permissions required for doing a school survey. For the use of an instrument, so suppose you're using a screening tool, you're using a questionnaire, many of these tools are copyrighted, many of these tools may not be free to use. So when you are planning a study, you need, many of these tools are available on the net, but may not be, in a sense, free to use. You may have to ask permission. You usually should ask permission. I'll run through each one of them and maybe come out in detail. The Clinical Trial Registry of India registration, it's very, very important, because otherwise, while I mean, you can proceed with your research anyway how, but the moment you submit it to Vanathi for publication, she'll ask you for a CTRI if it is a clinical trial. For international funding, if you are going to get funds from abroad, then you have a Health Ministry Screening Committee, or HMSC, which is the ombudsman for any financial transactions you are going to do from an international entity whenever funds are coming from abroad. Of course, if you have a drug trial or if you have a device that is going to be imported from abroad, you may require an import license or a trade license, after which you will be only allowed to bring it from the customs. And of course, ethics committee, as Vanathi mentioned, is probably the single most, whether you're doing it in humans, animals, stem cells. So these are the gross permissions that are required. There is, I haven't personally, and I'm not sure how many, but if you are doing research in recombinant DNA technology, modified, genetically modified organisms, products, then there is a whole lot of these genetic targeted committees that you may have to go to get permissions to handle genetically modified products. I'll run through the DCGI permission, because that is the first and the most important and can be very challenging. So whenever there is any foreign funded trial, so if you are part of an international multi-centric clinical trial, a DCGI permission, of course, it's not your responsibility, it is the responsibility of the sponsorer or of the group. They may have hired a CRO to kind of help them in the research in India. They are the ones who are going to approach the DCGI and get their license to do their research. Any new drug, so if there is a research going on on any new drug, so a new drug will be defined by that has never been used in the country or is not approved by the CDSCO. A new fixed dose combination, so if you are now mixing up a couple of drugs that are approved, but the FDC is not approved, it kind of now gets a label of a new drug and may require a DCGI permission. If you are even changing indication, route of administration, dosage or dosage form. So actually all these, while we are pretty comfortable in, you know, acquiring drugs which have been designed for systemic use, for ophthalmic use by, you know, by emulsifying them and putting them in a drop or whatever, but or injectables which we are using as drops, if you are going to, or if any entity is going to take licensing for it or to market, you will require DCGI permission. DCGI permission is not required for clinical trials that are for academic purpose, and most of us are essentially doing this for academic purposes to increase the pool of knowledge. So for them, it is not essential. It may be required in certain conditions, and this is now to be decided by your ethics committee. So now suppose you go to your institutional ethics committee and it is a drug that is an injectable and you're trying it for topical use, it may be that your ethics committee may ask you to go to the DCGI to get permission for the use of this drug. As I said, Although for academic trials it is not essential, but it may be required if the ethics committee has certain concerns related to that drug or its use. So this is the gross about DCGI permission. I talked about the site permission for schools, the principal, the Department of Education. If you're planning a survey in the community or in a social group, you may have to approach the state program officer, the DGHS or the Directorate of Health Services of that state or the country, or even the health secretary sometimes if it's a large survey in a state. Of course, organization, business, or a group, you may have to just approach their CEO or the master of that organization. We talked about the research instrument. A lot of times we are using questionnaires like a pain score. We are using questionnaire like a quality of life questionnaire. So while a lot of these are published and are open accessible, many of them are copyrighted or owned by the publisher or occasionally the author. It would be prudent to write to the publisher and get a formal permission. Sometimes we are not sure. The next step is sometimes we are modifying this questionnaire to suit ourselves or to suit our conditions. That is regulated by something called a fair use law. So you can modify, you can use it, provided it is not for commercial purposes. So the moment there is a commercial angle to it, you need a lot more permissions, including from the owner of the copyright. So like I mentioned, it can be, we use them very nonchalantly, but please remember it's an important tool, and that a publisher may actually write to the journal where you have put that, this was a copyrighted questionnaire. I'll just run through our ethics committee format. It's not comprehensive, it is not inclusive of everything, but this will just tell you all the key things we in our ethics committee consider important, and some of them will include permissions and some of them will just include what thinking you should have. So title, investigators, co-investigators. CV is important because we need to see that the person who is doing the study is adequately qualified to do that or not. So that's why a CV is required. Else the suggestions come that if you're doing a psych analysis, and you may not as ophthalmologist be well versed in assessing these questionnaires that have a lot of psych analysis in them, or multiple domains that we may not be well versed with, the suggestion goes that please add a psychologist, please add something who may be better at interpreting these tools and improving the quality of research. Objectives, justification of the conduct of the study. Again, a very, very important thing. You can't just get up and do. Actually, research, ethical research you should be doing with an objective so that it actually changes outcomes or has an impact in what you're going to do. So again, in the methodology, we always look for sample size estimation, because too many patients or too few patients are both unethical and incorrect, because you're wasting a lot of human resource if you're doing a very, very large sample size. And of course, if you take a small sample size, it's actually unethical. So ethics committee permissions this is what we are looking for when you're looking at drug. DCGI I talked about. Foreign trade, I mentioned that if this is a plan for a commercially available, or or a company is planning to market it and it's going to be imported into the country, then you may require the DGFT approvals. Safety measures are very, very important. You have to actually mention whatever you're doing. So, that is something, whatever test you may be doing, you may just be doing a survey. And we often, consider that, a survey, I'm just looking at the quality of life of a bilaterally blind patient after a road traffic accident. But there are a lot of things that go into it. So you can't just apply a questionnaire. There's a lot of psych-related changes that are happening to that patient. So in fact, that is why we have a social scientist, we have a lay person in our ethics committee who actually goes through these questionnaires to assess that can it be traumatic for the person to go through this questionnaire as a patient or whatever, your sample patient. So again, it's important. We need to always look from the other side. So the ethics is always designed to look from this point of view. Provision for medical risk. So often in investigator-initiated trials, you do not have funds to look for medical risk, but you have to guarantee that if there is any health hazard, and of course, this is one, you have to be upfront, including in your PIS, mention any health hazard or any damage that can happen, and subsequently also mention that we will be taking care of it, or we have made provisions for taking care of whatever adverse event that may happen to the patient as a consequence of this study. Confidentiality, again, it's an extremely important thing. You have to put it in black and white how you are going to maintain confidentiality of the patient. It is ethically grossly incorrect if anyone gets to know. Again, we sit in busy OPDs and we have a line and the subsequent patient is listening to what I'm talking to and what advice I'm getting and the diagnosis. But when you're doing research, it is just not done that anyone else should know what is the diagnosis, what is the management, and what is the outcomes of any patient who has undergone research or is a part of a research tool. Budgets again, because we have to look at, whether you have the adequate budget for the test. The patient should not be, as far as possible, the patient should not be paying for anything that he has to do as a part of this study. Now, if you're doing an observational study of outcomes of A lens versus B lens, and the study is not deciding the type of lens that is going to be put into the patient, it is fair enough that the patient buys the lens and comes. However, if you are, say, talking about a randomized controlled trial between A lens and B lens, then it is essential that, especially if there is significant cost difference between the two lenses, it is essential that the patient should not be paying for the lens, including some exceptional or tests that you may be wanting to do. So those are important things that we need to look at. I talked about the participant information sheet and the informed consent. I'll just look at it. I mentioned about the CTRI. So now for clinical trials, it is mandatory to register on the CTRI. It is optional at the moment for any other kind of trial, whether it is a case controlled study, it's a cohort, it is an observational. It is optional at the moment. Maybe over time it may also become mandatory. But for interventional trials, especially clinical trials, it is mandatory for you to register on the CTRI. This is just a takeaway of the important things that you need to mention when you're looking at PIS and PICF. You need to talk in detail in a direct tone, so you are not, it's not a third person that you're talking, so you're communicating to the patient and telling everything that he needs to know about the study. Now, suppose it's a randomized trial with an intervention versus a control. The patient should know that there is a third, if it's a 2:1 or a 1:1, there is a third or a 50% chance that he may not undergo any treatment. So these are important things that must be mentioned. You do not know which arm he's going to fall into, but it is mandatory that the patient should be aware of the fact, and only then is he taking an informed decision to enroll in the trial. Suppose he says, no, I want the therapy, I want some therapy. It's important for you to be able to assure the patient that not giving any intervention still remains the state of standard of care, or else we are giving you standard of care and over and above that we are adding an intervention. So these are, as I mentioned, important comprehensive information that every patient has the right to know. And of course the consent form, where it has to be in his language. Both the PIS and the PICF have to be in the language the patient is well versed in. So in Delhi we mandatorily insist in English and Hindi, and of course that the translation is adequate. That's again one thing. It's very simple nowadays. We put it to the Google Translator, but there have been major faux pas by Google when we go through both the English and the Hindi version, and you realize there are major, so obviously he's not the one who's doing research or has understanding for it, he or it or she, Google, whatever way you want to term. But as I mentioned, the PIS and PICF is very, very important. In fact, for clinical trials, for interventional clinical trials, it's still often necessary for us to have an audio-visual consent. So if you have an interventional randomized mass clinical trial, DCGI insists that you have a video recording of your informed consent. So first you have to take an informed consent of a video recording. Then you take the informed consent and video record it, and all the processes of signing. So first the informed consent of recording him, and of course that recording has to be kept confidential. Nobody should have access to it. Often when we've done it, we have to store them in separate memory cards, and they have to be sealed with numbered labeling so that nobody can ever get to know. However, the regulatory authority can at any time want to come and see your memory chips, so it may be necessary for you to have them stored for up to 10 years any consent form, any data for a clinical trial. So these are very, very important things that we must be aware of. So I've just run you through, like I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list, depending upon the kind of study you're going to do, and the kind of patients you are going to look at. We in ophthalmology often don't look at a very vulnerable population. So although we still do sometimes research in children, which is a vulnerable population, but pregnant women, children, patients with any form of mental or physical disability, of course patients who are in maybe incarcerated or are considered as vulnerable group, even school children, because they are a kind of captive audience, so they are a vulnerable group, and special care must be taken for consenting, not only from the principal but also from the parents. If you are just, even if you're looking at a school survey, especially if you are thinking of, say, even doing a refraction. So any drug on the child, a very, very strong, well-worded consent form is very essential. Otherwise, you may just land up into legal trouble. So thank you, Vanathi, for the opportunity, and thank you, everybody, for listening.
Yeah. Rohit, can you join us on the podium for a while so that
Sure.
we'll take questions related to, I hope you don't have to run or you have some time. Thank you. Yeah. So I'll ask you the first question, Rohit, here. There are now an increased trend of company-sponsored research here. So I think we all know that they have a new product which is coming, a new device, a new machine, and they do run it through either a single center or multi-centric studies. So what do we need to look at? Of course, it goes through an ethics proposal, and it should be a properly formulated proposal. If it's multi-centric, each of the centers will have to submit their ethics approvals. Beyond which, what do you want us to look into when we are looking at such company-sponsored trials?
Yeah, thanks, Manathi. It's a very, very important question. Thankfully, a lot of research is going on in India now, and it's great that with new regulations and new standard regulations, the international companies are becoming more confident to keep India part of the original research team as a part of In fact, it's important because, we as a group should encourage these companies whenever they're coming up with a new drug or device to include India in their original research group whenever they're planning a multicentric trial, because in India the regulation is that a percentage of Indian patients must have tested before it is permitted or given permissions for marketing. So any new drug that comes, unless there are very clear conditions which can allow a phase 3 clinical trial waiver for the drug, and there are certain conditions under which this waiver is given by DCGI, but otherwise every drug that is going to be introduced in the market must go through a phase 3 clinical trial in India. If required, maybe phase 1 and 2 also, depending upon the nature of the drug. So whenever you are being part of this, if you are part of any clinical trial, please see where all is this drug approved. That's the most important. Is India the only or one of a very small group of countries where this original research is going on? So if that is so, be a little more careful, because we are not aware of the complications. So if you have an idea, you ask for phase 1, phase 2 trials. Phase 1, phase 2 trials will be telling us grossly about efficacy, which is not such an important question, but about safety. All our problems in clinical trials land up because of safety, not because of efficacy. Efficacy, drug is not found good, there's no issues against you or for you. The company just loses money on a trial that did not result in a commercial product. But if there are adverse events, that results in serious issues, because as a PI, you are responsible to, within 24 hours, report the AE to the CDSCO, to your ethics committee, and to your institutional head. So that gives you a lot of responsibility. Within 24 hours, it becomes a very, very important thing. Otherwise, you're marked up for violation of a very strict rule. So look for adverse events, look for safety profile of the drug. When in doubt, get data on animal studies, get data on phase 1, phase 2 trials, so that you are fairly understanding the details of the safety. Of course, as the clinical trial will proceed, new things come up for drugs. So that is the most important thing. And 3 mandatory things for any trial: that you should have a DCGI approval, you should have an insurance certificate. That is a must, because that is saving you rather than anything else. So if anything else any adverse event happens and there is a compensation claim, that is taken care by the insurance certificate. And third, of course, the CTRI, with your site being listed in the CTRI.
I think that has made it quite clear to us, Rohit. Then the other aspect which you yourself pointed out as an example. For example, I'm doing an RCT of comparing one drug which is already a standard of care or is being used by multiple people. We all do cataract surgeries here. And there is a new drug, a new IOL which is, for example, being introduced, be it maybe for cataract or maybe refractive surgeries like a phakic IOL. And when you are doing a planned RCT trial, and if the company is going to say, because as government institutions we cannot fund a lot of, and there is no project in which has only a pure service component. Unless and until there is a basic science or a translational research component, we do not get funding on this. So sometimes the companies are willing to provide it to us free of cost. So how does this how is this viewed in the eyes of ethics clearance?
So, like I mentioned, there is nothing unethical about evaluating or even re-evaluating already marketed product. So, if you have a marketed product and the company is willing to sponsor, then there is nothing ethically grossly incorrect. Obviously, sometimes we do look into the aspects of it. Yeah, so there are issues related to conflict of interest, and you're looking into as to, I mean, if it's a very well known product, why is it being done? So the question again comes to the justification of the study. So they have to give a justification of the study, that maybe we are doing it in a different group, we are trying it in children, or there is inadequate information, it is a recently introduced lens, so there is inadequate. So that's justification is something that is important. And as I mentioned, if it's a sponsored trial, then we actually insist that the things that are going to be used for the trial should be provided free to the patient, and the patient should not be made. So it should not be that through you the company is actually increasing its sales of a particular kind of IL. So that becomes a serious ethical issue.
So I think yes. Can the hall coordinator please hand over the microphones to the audience who are going? The entire audience here are our panel. So
So very nicely elicited. Sir, I just wanted to know your views. In an interventional study, if the patients are knowing the benefit and they are going to drift from the control to the interventional group, will it not have a bearing on the result? That is one thing. And who will at all bear the cost of the escalated price, the cost?
So I'll go to the first one first. If the patient wants to change, now of course if you're doing it as a randomized trial, then
they may not.
Obviously, it could not be permitted. They'll have to, be excluded from the study. So the moment there is even a slight modification, the patient may have to be excluded from the study and bear the cost. So, like I mentioned, now if it's a sponsored trial, then obviously the sponsorer should bear the cost of any additional interventional cost that may be incurred during the course of the study.
So if it is unforeseen, side effects, some problems.
So that's why. So one is the insurance that is important, and essentially, if there is anything, the upfront, it is the responsibility of the sponsorer to ensure any cost related to the study, to ensure that you have access to those funds or are made available to you.
Is the hospital also liable in case the patient has a syncopal attack or some medical related problem? So will the hospital come to the rescue?
Exactly. So that's what it is essential. So as the institution that has provided you permission to, that is why I mentioned that wherever you're doing the study, the institution's permission is required.
Yes.
Because vicariously they are also responsible for the proper conduct of the study and anything that happens, because the patient is not coming to anything but the institution and to the PI as the clinician. So primary responsibility of care is with them. And obviously later on, if there is any examination or whatever, and SAEs have to be very carefully monitored. If there is any monitoring, any evaluation for that, then these things are considered very, very important.
Please take the mic, sir.
Yeah. Sorry, ma'am. During this Bhopal gas tragedy, we had taken a few clinical trials in Madhya Pradesh. Even though they were not FDA approved, the drugs were not even FDA approved. And some drugs were FDA approved, but the complication and the side effect the patient suffered in the hospitals of Bhopal, you may be aware of it. Now the question remains, sir, who is at fault? The company which has given us the drug to be trialed upon the patient who has suffered that Bhopal gas tragedy, and they have not quoted the side effect which this particular drug will have. And it was very perilous on the part of the Madhya Pradesh government to see that the unwanted side effects have already cropped up of a sudden. So, sir, who should be held responsible for this type of act?
So at that time, it was unfortunate, but there were hardly any regulations in place, and as you mentioned, unregulated drugs were permitted to come in. Therefore, it is a very, very major challenge to give a clear. Right now, as I mentioned, it would be the responsibility of the hospital and the sponsorer together for any side effects that happened, and funding should be provided by the sponsorer. But it is like I mentioned, that time there were no clear rules. I'm not aware of state-wise or central rules of that time. Now we have a very clear Drugs and Cosmetics Act that very clearly defines rules that have to be followed in any research and the responsibility of every one, including ethics committee. The ethics committee is also liable for anything that happens. So that's why I'm saying, so every step there is a responsibility and duties, and they are very clearly documented in the Drugs and Cosmetics Act.
Because a lot of statutory punishment were imparted to these people, the doctors. Few of my fraternity from my medical colleges, few very stringent punishment was imparted, which was upheld in the court, then it was relieved, they were relieved. So any type of regulatory authority do we still have on these trials?
So, like I said, now onwards, yes, very clear rules, and all are, court.
Yeah, you please take your time, no problem.
Hello. Yes, Rohit, that's something which everybody asks because they come from various parts of our country. How do they set up an ethics committee which would help them in their own districts, in their own societies? How can the state societies probably address this issue? And some words or pearls and advice from you on this aspect, because this is a problem which many of them who do not have
So there are two ways you can approach. Okay, now it's on. Yeah. So there are very, very clear rules about setting up ethics committee, and they are on the SEDESCO website. Very clear rules, a 15-member, how many should be institutional, how many should be outside institutional, what is the composition, including a layperson, a social scientist, a pharmacologist, a legal advisor. So there are very, very clear rules. There is no ambiguity about setting up. Now the question is that how do we set it up? Or we are not, I'm a small practitioner or I'm a small group, and how do I access it? Or my institution does not have it and does not want to spend on, or does not have that many trials. So there are two options available. One, the government has permitted, or the SEDESCO has permitted, any ethics committee to review projects of any place within 50 kilometers of that institutional ethics committee. So if that ethics committee is willing, they can be submitted these projects and they can give your ethical reviews and permissions for ethical. Of course, these have to be registered ethics committees. There is a list of registered ethics committees on the CDSCO website. It is, earlier it was a 3-yearly renewal of registration, now it is a 5-yearly renewal. So there are very strict rules, they require documentation, and once that you are registered, they can kind of review projects for up to 50 kilometers. The other there are a lot of private, what is called as independent ethics committees, which are private concerns and do the same thing. They are a group of people who are running these ethics committees and they can review. But again, their area of influence is limited to 50 kilometers. It is set up because officially the ethics committee is also supposed to monitor, periodically evaluate the site where the research is going on, where they have given the ethics approval. Therefore this, so now it may be challenging for national societies or even state societies to have a separate ethics committee because of this 50-kilometer rule. But again, you may have to work with CDSCO to ask for whether, because of these conditions, you may ask for a waiver to that rule and be permitted to create an ethics committee.
One last question, Rohit. So, how does an individual practitioner verify the validity of such an ethics committee which exists independently? Is there a way of him knowing that his registration is expired? This is a valid committee, and do they have to pay any registration, charges for the services or charges for the ethics approval?
So, independent ethics committees obviously will be charging. So that's their business, so they're charging for this. You can check their you can ask them for their registration certificate. They all will be having a registration certificate. In fact, on their website, they're supposed to keep it because it can anytime be asked for scrutiny. And the list of all the registered ethics committees is supposed to be regularly updated on the CDSCO website. So that's of course, the final arbitrator. But when in doubt, you can ask them that, just give me. And sometimes it is required because some journals have asked that, give us the registration certificate of the ethics committee or the registration number so that they can check it on the website.
Fantastic inputs from Dr. Rohit here. So before we move on to the next part of this IJO Livewire, I would welcome any more questions for Dr. Rohit, please, on this subject. Yes, Tani. Take the mic, please.
In our institute, the chairman of the ethics committee is a retired judge. So, is it necessary that the chairman should always be from the ethical?
No. So so you have to have a legal person in the ethics committee. The chairman has to be a non-institutional member. The member secretary has to be the institutional member. The chairman has to be a non-institutional member. He can be from any background, clinician, pharmacologist, legal aspect, social scientist. So chairman can be anybody.
So, excuse me, sir. In the institution, if you want to start the research thing, so can it be the internal board and then external board?
So, so there is a different thing called an IRB, an institutional review board or institutional research board, that does not have these regulations. So that is up to the institution how they want to compose or what rules they follow for an institutional review board or an institutional review committee. But when we are talking about an ethics committee, that is a legal committee, legally recognized by the government, by CDSCO, the arm of the Drug and Controller General of India, and of course has, as I had mentioned, legal responsibilities. That has a very strict composition that has to be followed, before which that ethics committee will be given registration.
Thank you very much, Rohit. I think there's one more. Yeah, okay. Yes, so thanks so much, Rohit. And I think Dr. Santosh, sorry to make you wait on this, but I think adding on and carrying on the subject of permissions and publication ethics, Dr. Santosh Honawar needs no introduction, and he will talk to us about all what you want to know about publication ethics. Over to you, Dr. Santosh.
Thank you, Vanity. I'll be speaking on the aspect of publication ethics. Well, publication ethics is not a transient line on sand. It's an indelible Lakshman Rekha you should never cross because there are a lot of legal and other implications. It can harm your reputation. It can harm the reputation of the organization that you represent. And not just that, the innocuous co-authors who are not aware of the misconduct that the author has indulged in can also get into the net. So ethics in publications are of four folds. One is, of course, the responsibility of the authors that I am talking about. But beyond that, there are other ethics that are involved of the reviewers. Reviewers are not supposed to use any of the material that they have reviewed for their own good. In the sense that if I have a paper which has 48 cases of a kind of series that I'm interested in and I have 100 odd similar patients, I can't reject that article just for that purpose and propagate my own series. That is unethical. We are not going into that aspect in this lecture today. Publishers also have ethical boundaries and editors of course have a very strong ethical boundary. They cannot favor one person over the other just because they know that person or otherwise. Now research is based on trust because based on what you publish, several things can get changed. It can affect the health of the patient, it can affect the economy of a country, it can affect everything about health and the way medicine is practiced, way ophthalmology is practiced. Research is based on absolute trust and there should be no crossover of this trust barrier. And trust, as you know, is very hard to build and it can be lost in just a second. One mistake, knowingly or unknowingly done by the author or the co-author, can lose this trust aspect. Loss of trust has a cascading effect not just on the author but on the entire group of authors, on the institute and even for that matter country. Some of the countries are considered unethical because some of the authors there of that country have had a lot of detractions. So it can have an implication on a very broad scale. It can harm human lives, it can harm vision if you have propagated a treatment modality that has a lot of side effects which are not revealed in your research paper that can harm vision. And it is impossible to earn trust back. It's absolutely impossible unless you are a politician. You know, election can make politicians reborn, but not in publications. You can never be reborn in the realm of publication. Being an author involves a lot of responsibility. One is that you are responsible for the originality of your work. You should not do data fabrication. You should not indulge in data misinterpretation, data or image manipulation, even cropping up of an image which has something which can have an implication on the publication is not acceptable. Brightening the image, changing the contrast is okay, bringing the image to natural colors is okay, but not hard editing. Plagiarism, of course, is absolute no, and authorship has to be appropriate. Now, Rohit, I think, has already spoken about ethical approval, etc. So I won't go into the details, but it is mandatory for all scientific publications. Either you get a waiver for a case report. Some of the journals are happy to give you a waiver from ethical approval. But otherwise, if a journal does not give you a waiver, then it is mandatory for all scientific publications, including video publications. You can either go through your institutional review board or ethics committee, or independent ethics committee in your own geographic location, which is 50 kilometers. They charge and their registration validity is supposed to be listed on their website, which is easy to find, but they charge a lot. It should be an accredited ethics committee. This has been already made clear to you. Now, if you're doing a prospective clinical trial, even if it is a thesis, if you want it to be published, from 2009, there is a rule that it has to be registered in clinical trials registry in India. Any trial involving human participants of any sort of intervention, including drug trials, surgery, preventive measures, lifestyle modifications, devices. For example, yoga causing reduction in IOP has to be registered. As simple as that. You're not doing any intervention. You're just asking the patient to meditate for 15 minutes in the morning and measuring his IOP, but that has to be registered if you want it to be published. Devices, educational and behavior treatment. That means that you are validating two methods of teaching small incision cataract surgery. If it is not registered, it may not be published at all. Indian journals are slightly lenient towards this aspect, but the government is not. So this is something that is very mandatory. rehabilitation as well. So it includes PG thesis. So PG thesis don't come under an exception. So whenever we accept an article arising out of a PG thesis or for awards, we should evaluate this aspect. Now, informed consent is mandatory for all study participants, and ICMR has a template which you can use as a broad-based template, but you can actually modify this template to customize it to your requirements and your study requirements. This template is not all encompassing. It is a very structured template, all right, but it has to be customized to suit your requirements. And one important aspect is that it should be available even for retrospective studies for and reproduction of images. So how do you do it? You are working in an institute or an organization or even in your clinic. Now after 5 years you realize that, well, I have a rare situation where I have 8 cases of this particular rare disease. Now I want to publish it, but you don't have any permission from any of the patients. So at the beginning of your practice, in my practice for the last 25 odd years, I have been taking a blanket consent from all my patients that their data can be used for scientific studies and their image can be reproduced. If they refuse, I make a point in my medical records that the patient has refused consent. And whenever you use such an image, obviously you have to crop it and mask their part of the face, etc. But being an oculoplasty surgeon, sometimes you have to show the face. And we have a mechanism where this consent is obtained. And if a patient hasn't given consent, we will not show these records at all or even use it for publication. So we have a mechanism to obtain a blanket consent which is valid. But some journals are asking for fresh consent. Like I submitted an article for British Journal of Ophthalmology. Only a part of the face was visible. I submitted my blanket consent. They said, no, blanket consent is not acceptable from this point onwards because Europe has passed a law against using blanket consents. So you have to give a fresh consent, and 2 of the patients were deceased. They were no longer there. So I had to remove those 2 patients and get consent from the other patients who are alive. So that strict they are. So you have to be very sure about these aspects. Now data ethics concern to fabrication. Fabrication is drawing conclusions from data that is not generated by the study at all. That means that you are cooking up data in very simple words. Ballooning is fabricating higher numbers than real. If you have 30 patients and you're reporting a series of 300 patients with the same percentage, 18%, 18%, but your number was 30, you ballooned it up to 300, that is unethical, although your conclusion may just be the same. Falsification is manipulating research material, equipment or processes, or changing and omitting data or results such that the research is not actually accurately represented, including standardization of an applanation tonometer. If you haven't calibrated an applanation tonometer and have used it for a particular study and have stated that the applanation tonometer has been calibrated, that is supposed to be unethical because that would have under-measured or over-measured your IOP. Journals may summon raw data even after publication, so you are bound to preserve all your medical records and Excel sheets in a folder. Loss of data, change of laptop, lost laptop are not excuses. You are supposed to preserve this data at least for a significant number of years, 5 to 7 years, because this can be summoned at any time, and if you are not able to reproduce, well, it is taken as a negative aspect in terms of the research, and the entire team can get blacklisted without you knowing. Sometimes you realize that a journal is not publishing your articles at all, sending it back without even a review, and the reason could just be that somebody from your institute has indulged in this aspect. That's the reason why the journals are not proceeding with your articles. Secure the data set, including patient tracing information, in a backup hard disk which is protected and kept safe. The true meaning of plagiarism is kidnapping, or plagiarism is a kidnapper. It refers to use of previously published work by another author without consent, credit. So even if you haven't taken consent, you have to give credit to the previous author, or acknowledgement and fraudulently passing as his own work. Sometimes it happens without us realizing. If you have read an article 20 times, the words just come into you, you just keep typing the same words or similar sentences that the author has used without realizing that you're reproducing a majority of the paragraph that you have read from a particular article. So you should be very guarded against that. It's the most common form of publication misconduct. In fact, about 40 to 60% of articles have some amount of plagiarism. About 15 to 20% is excusable because definitions cannot change. What also cannot change are the diagnostic criteria. You cannot rephrase diagnostic criteria or definitions, so you should use the same words. That is acceptable. If you're writing a review article, your plagiarism could be as high as 25 to 30%, but as long as you're able to justify it, it is acceptable. It could be drawn out of your own work, which you can't change in terms of, say, paraphrasing, which is acceptable. So editor has a responsibility to assess whether it is really plagiarism or because it's just a review article with a lot of definitions and diagnostic and therapeutic results criteria that are involved, that it looks as if it's been plagiarized. It's actually stealing if you have done it, with the intent of doing it. There are many ways of, many definitions of plagiarism or types of plagiarism. Complete is obviously, as it indicates, direct, paraphrasing, mosaic or patchwork or potluck plagiarism. You take a bit of this, bit of that and put it in your article. Self-plagiarism is what you have written earlier. You reproduce it exactly nearly the same. That means I have written a review article for Delhi Journal of Ophthalmology. I find an opportunity to write for Survey of Ophthalmology. I reproduce almost the same article for Survey of Ophthalmology with just a few new articles added in the review. That is not acceptable. You have to rewrite the article with the content being almost totally different. Otherwise, it's self-plagiarism. Source misinterpretation, misrepresentation, that means you are quoting some article, but it is not from there. That is also considered unethical, and sometimes it is accidental, as we already described. So how to avoid plagiarism, even unintentionally, is to try to be original, summarize available knowledge in your own words, make sure that you're not kind of, habitually reproducing certain paragraphs, paraphrase line by line if you have to reproduce a concept, quote if it is directly reproduced. That means it has to be included within inverted commas, quotation marks, and the author has to be quoted either by a superscript or whatever the journal provides parenthesis. Use appropriate reference, and always check for this before you submit it to a journal. It's a very simple thing. If your postgraduate student or your fellow has written an article, make sure that they use any of this software. Some of these are freely available. Some of these are free to access, some of these are minimally paid, but they have to submit it along with the article with the first draft itself so that you know what is the amount of plagiarism. And in fact, when you use the software, the portion that is plagiarized is actually highlighted. And you know exactly what has been plagiarized, and if it is nothing significant, you can rephrase those sentences and help your own fellow or a resident. Now, simultaneous submission is also unethical. That means I submit to IJO, and I know that IJO will take 6 weeks, but I also have a journal which may take 4 or 5 weeks. Now I submit it to IJO, but if it is accepted in another journal, I ask the journal to withdraw. This is happening, very common. In fact, it is quite common. People submit to 2 or 3 journals, and from whichever they get acceptance, they go ahead with it, and rest of the journals, they ask for a withdrawal. That is not acceptable. Can submit after only a categorical rejection. Even if your article is under revision, you cannot submit it to another journal unless it is rejected. Duplicate publication of substantially similar material, even in a journal not indexed, is not acceptable. That means you have an institutional journal or your university journal where you have published something, then you want to submit it to IJO, absolutely not acceptable. Reason being, what is not indexed can also be found on the net, right? Because these are the days of digital media, and you can actually search for a particular article on the net even though it is not indexed. Conference presentation and publication of the abstract in proceedings is acceptable. Now there are 2 terms that you must know: salami slicing and beef up. That means you have a large retrospective or a prospective study that has lot of parameters, but you want to kind of divide it into 3 or more publications. This is very common. This is happening all the time. In fact, for larger multicentric trials, they say publication number 1, publication number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But if it is not justifiable, you have just divided the study results into multiple parts just for the sake of many publications, that is not acceptable. Beefing up is you have a weak study, but you have another data set which you combine purposefully to make the study stronger, then even that is not acceptable. Going on to authorship ethical aspects, all persons designated as authors should qualify for authorship, and all those who qualify should be listed. Both are unethical. If you have a colleague who has helped you with the study, but you have missed him or her just for the purpose of missing him or her, that is not acceptable. Similarly, adding a head of the department, even though he or she is not involved in your work in any way, not even reviewing it, is also not acceptable. So you have to be very, very clear with it. Now, authorship criteria are very clear. The author should have substantially contributed to conduct of the study, including its conception and design. Somebody has helped you design, he could be an author. Helped you acquire data, optometrist has helped you acquire data, she or he could be an author. Has done statistical analysis for your study with or without payment, he could be an author. And has helped you interpret, he could be an author. But unless they're not involved in the study, they cannot be authors. Drafting or revising the article for intellectual content can be attributed to authorship. Approval of the final version can also be attributed to authorship, but you have to mention actually what is the role of the author in all that. Extent of contribution decides the order of authorship. This is also very clear. Somebody who has contributed substantially cannot be put in the middle as the third author, whereas you yourself have assumed to be say corresponding author or the primary author. That is also not acceptable. Now somebody can complain, that is the reason. So your thesis candidate goes and complains that, well, my guide has put me as the third author, whereas I have done the study. Well, that is unethical. You know, three terms here: ghost author, gift author, and guest author. Ghost author is somebody who's not listed as an author, but you have used that person to write your article for a fee. That's a ghost author. Gift author is you have gifted the authorship to somebody just because he's a big person. Guest author is somebody who you have called in. Now I have an international collaborator who is a very big name. For example, I just put Carol Shields in just to get my publication in ophthalmology. Well, that is not considered ethical. And even she wouldn't not agree to be a co-author unless she has substantially contributed. So guest authors are not allowed. And conflict of interest. Now people keep wondering, well, if I am advisor to a particular company and if I done a study which is something similar to do with that company, is it unethical? It is not unethical as long as you declare it. So having conflict of interest is absolutely acceptable. Failure to disclose that conflict of interest is unethical. Now there could be direct financial, indirect financial conflicts, but all of which has to be kind of disclosed. Self-citations. Indian habit, this is purely Indian Asian habit that we keep on citing our own articles, and anything more than 12 to 15% is considered unacceptable. In fact, in Stanford ranking of authors valuation, they mention they have an additional column in their Excel sheet which removes those self-citations and gives you a separate ranking. So finally it will come into being formally that they'll remove self-citations for good. Questionable research practices, selective reporting of dependent variables. These are mainly to increase your QRPs. Collecting more data after the study is concluded to try and make the findings significant, happens in situations of thesis. Reporting selective studies that worked and not reporting studies that did not work. Rounding up p-value to make it significant. These are all very commonly done. Reporting unexpected findings as having been predicted. So all these are considered unacceptable. Now, paper mill is a profit-oriented organization which can generate paper for you, but these are heavily plagiarized material. Use of artificial intelligence to write paper, ChatGPT to write paper is not acceptable. Just before I remitted my office, I had a submission from an author where he had lifted ChatGPT as a co-author. That is not acceptable. So these are things that are being debated because increasing use of artificial intelligence is, well, for us to live with. But consequences of all this can be severe. Whenever an editor finds that there is a misconduct, they inform the authors, and if the authors are not able to justify the misconduct, then you should reject the manuscript and inform the institution and the ethics committee. If the manuscript is already published, if it's a minor misconduct, then publish an erratum, which is punitive enough because erratum actually describes exactly what was wrong with the study and why we have corrected it. That's a punitive measure. It can be noticed because it's on PubMed. If an error is major, then you can revoke the manuscript or withdraw it. Inform COPE member journals. If you are a COPE member journal, blacklist the author, and inform the institution and the ethics committee. Sometimes they can counter you saying that your action is unjustified, so you have to actually process this very judiciously. There are COPE guidelines, and also you have to set up a committee to investigate this aspect, because you cannot take the responsibility as an editor on yourself to have taken this action. So you have to have a backing of a committee, which is a voice of educated, expert individuals who will back up your decision. Otherwise, your individual decision can be questioned because of bias, etc. And that could come on the author or on the editor heavily. Then institutional discipline is demotion, punitive measures including termination. Those the institutes have to take. Now, if you want to read more about it, Sen Gupta and me had written an article on publication ethics in Indian Journal of Ophthalmology in 2017, and most of this is relevant, and we have a publication ethics checklist also there. And there is a website which is called publicationethics.org, which will give you much more information and in fact scare you for all, because it has a lot of information, and whatever we do something, even if we do something which is very, very innocuous, that can come under the radar of publication ethics. So you should be very careful, but if something happens by mistake and somebody has done a mistake in your own group and it's a minor error, it's a good idea to inform the editor and let the editor take it forward, not hide it, because somebody else may discover it and the consequences then can be much severe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Santosh. I think that was a comprehensive coverage of what one has to look into when you're publishing on your thing. There's one question which I want you to see, that I do have a lot of submissions which are coming from a particular country, and I know they are not, a lot of publications, a lot of submissions coming from a particular country. I know they're not very good in writing English,
Right.
but sometimes you find it is too good to believe that
Right.
this English is, and I several times do suspect that ChatGPT has been used to write out this entire manuscript. So, and how do I go about it, or how do I, even if they do acknowledge they've used a ChatGPT, they don't. So how do we, go about this?
There's an AI use detector software which you can run the manuscript through, that will tell you whether AI has been used to modify the article or write the article, and if that is substantial, you can reject it straight away. Or ask the authors if they have used AI for writing the manuscript, and if they admit that it has been indeed used, you can reject the manuscript. Okay. They may actually have used a writing service. Using a writing service is acceptable, because they may have written the article in Chinese or German, and then they may have used a medical writer to translate it into English. That is fine.
Okay, thank you. I think now we'll move on to the final talk of this session here. Professor Dr. Namrata Sharma again needs no introduction, and I really thank Dr. Santosh Unawar and Dr. Namrata, who are having really busy schedules, and they have to look up to and set up the evening inaugurations, but they have spent their time, because I know research is very close to their hearts, and I really thank you for being here in this session. Over to you, ma'am, for telling us how to go about a revision and rejection comments of your manuscript.
So thank you, Vanithi. I think it's a great session, and I would be, out of my own practical experience, taking you through how to go about revision and rejection comments for your manuscript. I always say, and I always believe that nothing should remain in your computer. Everything that is there should be on the internet, and that is how you will, publish. Mediocrity, it should not be done with mediocrity, but perfection is very difficult to achieve. So it's best that even if a paper comes back with rejection, you immediately address it and send it back. So I think it is important first, whenever you are trying to publish something and you are trying to do research, to know a topic in what you are going to do it. So suitability of the topic is very good. Don't do something which already is published or already been done. So you've already lost the battle even before, even before trying to fight it, because if your question or hypothesis is not correct, and if it is a me too kind of a thing trying to do something which others have already done, it will not get published. It has to be a new idea, new indication, new complication, new way of managing it, different way of doing it. Only those things, they see the light of the day much faster. Or if you're doing something which others have already done, then it has to be larger numbers, greater follow-up, larger subjects, better studies in the form of, randomized controlled studies or randomized controlled trials, etc. So it is a very important before you, you should have the, when you begin, you should have the end in mind. You should know what you are going to, achieve. So to have the end in mind is very important, that then only you can start something in a planned manner. So, like I said, it is important to know what is already known, and you should know what are the gaps in knowledge and whether the anticipated time scale that you're thinking is appropriate, whether you have the support systems for this which are appropriate or not. Statistics has become an integral part of all publication, and so you should have a statistician friend who should be able to guide you. All proper protocols should be followed, including the ethics committee approval, etc. Then main concepts, measurable indicators, they are two very important things, and it is always good to review the literature first and see what is lacking in literature. It can be any kind of study, it doesn't matter. When I start to write a paper, after I have conducted a study, I would always do the results first. So that is how I do, because once you have the results, method you already know, introduction is not difficult. It is the results, because the results are going to tell you whether you need to do sub-analysis or not, whether you can analyze it differently, whether you can get out new things, because you already have data. Data is gold, and data is everything in today's world. So after you've written a good paper and put down everything, which is related to the study, inclusion, exclusion criteria, source of population, period of study, informed consent, ethics committee approval, etc. Technical information that you put down in the paper is very important. You can't say I did keratometry or I did topography using pentachem. So you have to, when you say pentachem, then you have to say which country it is, then you have to say which is the company it is making. So all those things you can look at what is already published and how you are supposed to write it down. In that way, it should be written. Now, procedures which should be identified in sufficient detail to allow others to reproduce it should be identified in such a manner and should be written. Procedures which are well established, you can only reference them. There is no need to write whole procedure about it. And once, like I said, when you're writing, say, ALTK machine, it will be Moria Surgical, Antony, France. So everything has to be mentioned as per how it is mentioned in a publication. Now, statistical, you have to provide data relevant to the research, and the data presentation should be clear and simple. Always put absolute numbers and put percentages and also the p-value, and findings should be in the logical sequence. Do not repeat the data which is already there in the text. Whatever the journal guidelines are for figure, tables, illustrations, etc. should be followed. And like I said, whatever is available in figures and tables, don't put it in the text again, there is no point. So every journal has a different way of putting tables and figures, and that should be followed. And in discussion, you don't have to put everything, you don't have to put the entire review of literature, but only what is novel, what is important, and what is your major finding in the research project. You start from there. And do not overinterpret the data. Whenever you write discussion, compare and contrast with other results, explain conflicts if any, list the limitations of the study, the clinical implications of the work, and also describe future problems for the peers, and also list the unanswered questions and the possible research avenues that might resolve these issues. Once you write all this down, the reviewer has a fair understanding that he knows that you know what you are doing. Of course, acknowledgement references in the style which the journal wants should be written. So there are two ways of doing it, and whatever the journal says, that should be done. This I just put down what is my order of writing. So I put down the tables first, results, then the discussion. Introduction you can do any time, and material and methods is already there because you've written the protocol. So recheck the references again the day you are submitting, because some reference would have come one day before or in the morning and you've submitted, not listed that, they'll say it is not cited. So always do that. Now rejection, if you receive a rejection letter, you should never give up. Rejection just means you should think in your mind, rejection means it is not their priority. And if you want to make yourself happy, you think rejection means it's their loss, not your loss. So because you know that once you've written a paper, it is going to see the light of the day. be it any number of times, it does not matter. When you get the comments from the referees, read carefully, because this is an opportunity to improve your manuscript. It is not rejection. It is another opportunity. He's adding to what you already know. Address both positive and negative comments. First thing is just copy paste all the comments, put it down in a paper, and then see how you are going to answer those comments. Directly address response under each comment and thank referees for positive comments. Don't confront. You want referees to accept your papers. You don't want them to reject your papers. Sometimes you might think this is wrong, the referee is wrong. No point in telling him that he is wrong. He is only going to review the papers. So you are at the receiving end. So don't confront. If there are any errors, etc., say we apologize for this error. If he is given good suggestions, say thank you for your wonderful suggestions. So those kind of acknowledgements and diplomatic language is required. Make changes within a week, 7 days. Beyond 7 days, it should not remain in your computer. Delayed reply means delay in publication. Delay in publication means somebody else will do it, and then you are going to sit and cry about it that you had already written and you didn't send it in time. Changes, additions, or corrections should be very clearly identified like this. So when you put down something, title page, page 1, line 1 and 2, page 1, line 1 and 4. So for everything, it should be very clearly highlighted where the change is. And whatever the change is there, that also should be highlighted in the copy where the changes have been made. So this is just about diplomacy as to what I was talking about. Be polite, and whatever is not there, you can very easily say that this data is not there with me, and we can plan a next study with this. The reviewer is not going to reject it because of that. He's going to, he's in fact going to, he or she is going to appreciate your, having said that this is not possible in this particular study. Now, the reasons for manuscript rejection is when the material is not relevant to journal's readership. So if you are sending something, say, something, for instance, JAMA Ophthalmology likes to take glaucoma and retina articles more. So if you try to send something like cataract, a new technique, difficult to publish there. If cataract, new technique, send it to JCRS, which is probably easier to do. Then inaccuracy of the data, inappropriate instrumentation, inaccurate or inconsistent data, small sample size, defective tables and figures, inappropriate statistics, overinterpretation of results, incomplete, inaccurate or outdated review of literature. All these are the causes of rejection. And you would not make these mistakes if you follow what I had told you in the previous slides. So to avoid this, you should, plan it well. Like I said, keep the end in mind. Keep your whole concept in mind that I have to publish this study in this journal. If it doesn't go through, then this. Step down your journals. Ophthalmology, if it is not good, I'll send it to cornea. If it is not good, I'll send it to eye contact lens or whatever. So just put it in your mind like that. So this is just to show that you can do it. Initially, you may publish in journals which are not that good, like we did it when we started our career, but you also become experienced with time and you know how to publish it. Now there are certain things which, for instance, power of a case report. I've put down this because for years together, one cornea we've been using in multiple patients. It was in 2011, we realized this is not published, that component surgery of cornea, 1 donor cornea for 3 recipients. So there are sometimes very simple things which are not published in literature. So you have to be vigilant about it, what is published and what is not published. Then you have to define your areas of publication. I say that because if you do your publication in one particular field, the chances of acceptance are more because your credibility is already established there. So if you are into cornea or cataract or refractive, try and continue that in that particular field only. Sometimes reviewers are very helpful. So when we send this Pseudomonas keratitis after collagen cross-linking for keratoconus case report, he rejected it. And then second letter followed and said that if you add review of literature, I can put it in your, I can take it as a review. So we put it as case report and review of literature. So he actually helped you because you were submitting a case report and he made a review out of it with your case report. So they're not always bad. The reviewers sometimes, really help you also. And you have to be vigilant in the sense that whatever you present in the conferences, don't go and sit on it. Because if you sit on it, So many people are, watching it, and so many people are imbibing. Everybody is very intelligent. If they have done something, they'll publish it, faster than you or before you. Then there may be certain genuine concerns, like, for instance, just one example, orokeratoprosthesis came. So we immediately did, some cases and published, because we knew that orokeratoprosthesis, nobody in UK or USA will do, because it is an India-centric product. But however, this got published in British Journal of Ophthalmology. So what I am saying is that whatever is novel, whatever is different, whatever is new, you should concentrate on that. Then whenever you are doing studies, you have to be very vigilant on the website also. So for instance, we were doing this study on fungal keratitis, and our study design was similar to the study designed by Arvind. But when we were planning the study, we realized that we would be duplicating the study. And this is there, when you register your trial, it is there on the website. So once you realize you're duplicating your study, change the design of your protocol so that you get something else out of it. And again, do not duplicate, and then compete, with somebody else after having done a similar study. So always publish after you present. This I have already told you. Whenever you present in American Academy, you publish in ophthalmology. You present in AIOS, you publish in Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. You present in ASCRS, or in ISCRS, you present in JCRS. So this is very important. Likewise for movies, you can win. This is one example where we won awards for movies in the same year for the same film 3 or 4 times. But when we went to publish, we could not publish because we were late in sending our material for publication. Somebody else had already published before us. So that's why I'm saying you have to be really vigilant and you have to be fast. And like I said earlier, do not give up. Rejection means it's not their priority. And sometimes you have to change categories. So if I have this intrastromal fluid drainage with air tamponade rejected from cornea, so I will change the category. I know BGO requires category of technique. So I'll go and put it in the technique category, not in the original paper category. Because in the technique category, there would be fewer articles which are going to be accepted. So that's what I'm saying, that you have to be vigilant to know which categories you have to choose and how you have to change the categories if any of your paper is rejected. Change continents. This I have always told everyone, that if something rejected from AIJO, Archives, Cornea, you are targeting US. You are targeting US reviewers. So you change your continent, you publish, you send it then to IN, British Journal of Ophthalmology, because the reviewers would change. It's UK. Or Clinical and Experimental Ophthalmology, because that's Australia. So the reviewers will change. So to conclude, I would just like to say that no amount of clever writing can cover up for a poorly designed study. So writing is important, but a good study is also very important. And scientific writing is a skill which comes with practice. There was a publication which got rejected 17 times, but still saw the light of the day. 17 times, not 70 times. But the point is, never keep it in your laptop. Always, it should be on the internet and it should be there on the cloud. So to conclude, all ophthalmologists world over are intelligent. All of us are. All are thinking alike. All are doing similar things. So you don't have to be smarter than them, but you have to be faster than them in conception of an idea, execution of an idea, publishing the idea, and also addressing the reviewer's comments when your paper gets rejected. Don't keep it for more than 7 days in your computer. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Namrata. I think that was a comprehensive coverage of how one needs to deal with your manuscript, right from how you perceive your study and how you take it through your research writing, and how you need to put it or present it to the editors or when you submit to a journal, and how you also need to address the rejection comments. There are times when you can also refute the rejection comments. Yeah. Okay, I think I thank you all for this packed hall, and here I have Sudipto asking one more question. Yes.
Yeah, I was just asking if how many minimum reviews should we have, ma'am, so that the paper gets accepted, and how important it is that from the, not the reviews, references, minimum should we have, and how important it is that we should, minimum references for paper to be accepted, and quoting of anything from, if reference is given, then how important it is that it should have a quoting of the, maybe a line or a picture from it. How important is that?
You should not quote verbatim from any, it has to be written in your own words, that's one. Then number two is that the number of references for every type or category of the manuscript is already defined by the author guidelines of, or the submission guidelines to the authors by every journal. So one has to look at it. It would vary if it's an original article, it would vary if it's a review. So those have to be addressed according to the journal's guidelines. Yeah. The references always has to be cited in your manuscript. It has to be cited in your manuscript. You cannot give a reference without a citation in your text. Yes. Thank you all, and thank you for this packed hall for an IJO session. Thank you very much. Looking forward to more quality, high impact submissions from all of you.